Okay, welcome back, folks. And thank you to Commissioner Winters and the rest of the crew from DCF for coming back so quickly. We realized we didn't have sufficient time to delve into some of the questions that we had for the DCF budget presentation from last week. So thank you for being here. And
Oh, I'm sorry,
it's okay.
did not turn it on.
We Representative Donahue had a major disaster at house yesterday, so.
House, not leg, broken leg.
No, but
So less of a.
she deserves some latitude, today, for sure.
The disruption jar.
Yeah, we got rid of the disruption jar, really, yeah, it's up there. So now is the opportunity for members to ask some specific questions about line items, and I guess we should probably be somewhat orderly so that we're not jumping around. So why don't we start with the B316 area, which is admin essentially. And are there any sort of like one of the things, and sorry, I can't remember if I asked this question before about vacancy savings. Are you budgeting like what percentage for vacancy savings across the divisions?
So for the record, Megan Swing, Financial Director, DCF. It's about 3%, 3 to 4%, but it does vary depending on the appropriation.
Okay, I think you said that last time. And is that is that sort of is that accurate at this point in time? Because I know like during the last 18 months to 2 years, there's been a lot of vacancies and trying to ramp up and get everything from some of the stuff in Deputy Commissioner Radke's area in particular, I think has been somewhat stressed. And I'm just wondering, is that 3% sort of consistent with what you're expecting? And where are you in terms of vacancies?
Sure, I think it stays fairly consistent in the current job market that we have. As you pointed out, in family services, in particular, our family service workers, they have some of the hardest jobs in state government. We've beefed up our recruitment and retention efforts there. We have a workforce director within family services who's working really hard on things like work-life balance and health and wellness, and doing different recruitment and retention strategies, including doing stay interviews with everyone. We've seen those vacancies drop very slowly, but they are dropping. I think we're down to something like 16 vacancies of family service workers, where we were at one point well over 20. And that's a large chunk of the workforce. And with people being so new, it also puts a lot of pressure on the other family service workers to pick up caseloads until those people are up to speed. I think Deputy Commissioner Radke is on the line and wonder if she would add anything to that around family services vacancies.
Yes, that's correct. For the record, my name is Erica Radke, Deputy Commissioner of the Family Services Division. And Commissioner Winters hit everything I would say. And I would add that the vacancy savings, right now we are at, I believe, 17 FSW vacancies, and that is down from a high of 28 vacancies in the summer. And a couple of the other initiatives that we're doing are we're having a mentoring pilot to see if we can also just work on retention, not just recruitment. And we are also piloting a 40-10 schedule to see if that will also give the workers what they need in terms of work-life balance. We've done a pilot and we're trying to get it reestablished, because not only did the workers overwhelmingly like having the 40-10 schedule, we also found that for our foster families, it was a lot easier for them to make contact after work with our workers to talk about cases.
Yeah, I'm not familiar with what the 40-10 schedule is. Can you just say a little bit more about that?
So we're working 10 hours a day for the 40 hours a week, and then you'd have a day off.
Gotcha. So essentially a 4-day work week. Is that, yeah, okay,
Exactly.
okay. And, you know, I know particularly in your family services division, there, you know, had been, well, actually, I think it impacted all across the department, but stress related to workers providing coverage in offices and hotel rooms and all sorts of different places for youth who were struggling. And can you just kind of give us an overview or an update on where that stands from your perspective? Are you seeing some stabilization happening there? I know with Red Clover opening up and some of the options down in southern Vermont being available, has that had an impact on the need to employ those kinds of methods?
Yes, what you're talking about is what we call staffing. When we have youth that are pending a placement where we need to have them stay in alternative settings, such as sometimes, very rarely, hotels, but generally we have places throughout the state where we've contracted to be able to have youth, and our workers will go in and take care of them while we're waiting for a suitable placement. And we have some new data I haven't had a good chance to look at, but the latest data that I've seen, we've been able to, with the combination of, we've hired workers from TLC, which tends to be like a nursing organization. They have a behavioral health specialist that come in to help with the staffing, as well as we have respite workers that do staffing. And we also have a team internal to the Agency of Human Services that we've specially trained to also help with this work. So I'd have to get the exact data, but I believe that at this point, the family services workers are not doing nearly as much staffing. It may be down to about 20% of our workers needing to staff, whereas the 80% is a combination of TLC, respite providers, and the CATS team, the AHS team doing the work. So it has dramatically increased, as well as the need for staffing has gone down because of Red Clover and because of some other initiatives we've done. We also have a bed dedicated to juveniles with developmental needs, but that we have purchased or, we've funded, where we can have youth stay there instead of being staffed as well. So with that combination of additional placements and additional people coming in to help, we've seen the family services workers having to staff much less, which has been good because they were doing a lot of that work on top of their regular day jobs.
Mhm. And at one point in time, we had seen a chart from, I don't remember if it was from you, Erica, or somebody there, that they gave us sort of the big picture about the number of residential beds that we had kind of like prior to COVID, during COVID, and then post-COVID. And, what I'm recalling from that is that we had a much higher license capacity than we were actually able to utilize due to staffing issues. And I'm just wondering if there's been any improvement in that aspect of residential care for youth.
That's a good question. No, it is still pretty stable. There's been a slight increase because of Red Clover and that bed we purchased we're funding, but it's pretty stable. We have not been able to make a lot of inroads in our community-based staffing, residential care. And the issue there is a lot of these programs are having a hard time hiring in order to get staff so that we can increase our census and sending more children there for care. So that's, it's still pretty low. It's about 50% of what it was at pre-COVID rates, roughly 50 to 55%.
So you can see where we're still struggling there. Yeah, go ahead, Representative Donahue. Thank you. Well, we had our subgroup here had a really good meeting with Erica yesterday on some of this and more information that's going to be coming. But just to clarify, So the things that you've just been discussing, including those, the staffing, is that part of that whole budget area that's called secure residential treatment facility that I've learned is a catch-all phrase, meaning
I'm going to
all of
defer
red
to,
clover and et cetera.
I'm going to defer to Megan, but my understanding is the facilities is in that secure residential line, but that are the funds that we're spending for TLC is coming out a different line. But Megan, can you weigh in, please?
Yes, so the staffing that was just mentioned, that for the actual like overtime that we're paying DCF staff, that would be hitting FSD's budget because we don't have any personal services funding in our secure residential treatment facility appropriation. The TLC actually does hit the secure residential, so that is one of the contractual costs that we incur out of that.
And the bed, the developmental services bed that you just
Yes.
referenced is also in
That's
the
also-
budget. Okay.
Well, that's also in the SRTF budget, yes.
So we're going to be getting a breakdown of those different beds and programs that are not broken out on the budget currently. They're
Okay.
working on that for us, so we'll
Okay.
be able to fill in the committee on
Great.
in more detail.
Great. I know that we had some level of not concern, I guess more curiosity in making sure that we're as we're moving forward in systems development, that we're not expecting a surprise at the end of the rainbow. So we're trying to track, sort of like where we started with the resources that Woodside had and where those have are being reallocated to as we pass through the system. And so your team is working on that.
Yes, and with appreciation to because we know we all run into this. There was budget language last year asking for some of that tracking that kind of was an oversight that got missed by the department, and they are now pulling that together for us in anticipation of us recommendations to appropriations.
All right. Thank you.
Thank you. And Madam Chair, if I could add some, in the interest of no surprises yet again, like there's some other good news that we don't, we often don't take time to celebrate that, or we don't count on that because things change very quickly in our world. But on the data that we just received yesterday, the number of children in DCF custody, it's below 900 for the first time in a very, very long time. When I started, it was over 1,000. That was 2 years ago. And it's been coming down, and there's, a lot that goes into that. It's complicated, but it's very good news that we have fewer than 900 children in state custody when it was, I think, a high of 1,400 or so about 10 years ago.
Yeah, may I add to that? And thank you, Commissioner, for mentioning that. It is really great news. And, as Commissioner Winters said, there's some complications on why it's gone. We've been able to have this decrease, but part of the reason is our work with what we call structured decision-making tools. And those are the tools that we use to assess risk and danger for when a child should come into custody, or whether when it is safe then for a child to be reunified with their family. And we've really gone to great lengths with our team to make sure they're using those tools with fidelity, as well as having court summits with the judiciary to make sure they understand the tools and how we use them. And what that has done is we've been really stringent with making sure that youth are coming into custody when necessary and leaving when appropriate. And we believe that has had a significant impact on that number. And we feel really good about that, because having a child come into custody unnecessarily is not something that we would ever want. We just want to make sure that it's when it's necessary to do so to ensure child's safety.
Great. Thank you. That is good news, and I think, in this committee, working with your department, we worked on some, I think some fairly substantial changes to the child welfare assessment and the words are escaping me, but in last year's work that I think also will into the future, hopefully assist in continuing to bring that number down while still assuring the safety of children and families. So thank you. Thank you for that work.
Sure. I mean, absolutely. I do believe part of it was the legislative study that you all commissioned to have done to sort of review our custody entrance rates. And there are a lot of recommendations that came out of that study that we were able to utilize and really take seriously. And I should also add that part of that large number, when it was the custody entrance rates were very high, part of that was due to the opioid crisis, as well as this was around 2016, and there had been a couple of really serious, terrible incidents where youth had been killed while in custody, and that caused a huge increase in people reaching out to DCF, and we bringing a lot of youth into custody. So from that high, we've been able to really come down much lower, but still ensure safety.
Thank you. Representative Sketty.
Will we see in this budget the cost savings with 500 less children?
Yes, we do have caseload adjustments. Did you want me to run through the ups and downs? Sure. And then, so unless anyone has any questions or thoughts or concerns, I'm gonna skip over the salary adjustments, the fringe adjustments, the net neutrals, the things from BAA, and just focus on the new things. So in admin, that is basically only the funding that we're requesting for some operating costs for OEO positions. There's 3 new OEO positions. The costs associated with their computers and technical and ADS support needs to sit in our administration appropriation. So that's just the only thing that's different from BAA, or that isn't service level agreement adjustments, ISS, internal service fund adjustments, or salaries, fringe. The next appropriation is family services. Again, we're skipping past all of the things for salary and fringe.
So I feel compelled just to say this because, DCF in particular works with a lot of small nonprofits through grant agreements and, and I recognize this is part of the budgeting process, while we have negotiated agreements for state employees and the Pay Act is being covered in the budget. We're not seeing anything for inflationary increases for any of the community-based providers. And that, in and of itself, especially for some of these folks who haven't received increases in over a decade, I guess what I would say is that I would hope that the expectations that the department has in their grant agreements gets modified to reflect the fact that, costs have risen. That means that people are going to be able to have to do less with what it is that the department is providing, because it's just not realistic to expect community-based providers to continue providing the same level of service that was funded 10 years ago. And so that's my little soapbox for community-based providers.
So then we have some technical corrections to net neutral from BAA. We already talked about those. We have the random moment time study adjustment. That is, I'm not sure we've discussed that here, but
We did in BAA.
We did on BAA.
yeah. And then we have 2 more BAA items. We have our ISF adjustments.
Anything that was in BAA, you can skip over.
And for those of you looking at the narrative, it's in the yellow section.
Okay. Oh, thank you. Thank you.
No worries. And so then we have a couple BAA items. The first different item is the FNAP savings. So that's the financial medical assistance percentage. We had our 4E, so the percentage of costs that the feds cover out of every dollar, basically, has increased slightly. But over a large budget, even a very small percentage increase can lead to federal funds that we are able to utilize and general funds that we no longer need to utilize. So because of this increase in the federal percentage, we're able to earn more federal dollars and save some general funds. The next line is the transportation contract pressure. We've already discussed that. It is larger in next year's budget than in BAA because we were able to carry forward some of our surplus at the end of last year to support this year's transportation needs. We don't have that available for next year, so we have a larger ask for next year. Then we have a bunch of BAA items. Then we get to the substitute care and subsidized adoption caseload utilizations. This is what Representative Steady brought up. So we are seeing continued decreases in the cost of our substitute care, which is children in our custody, and subsidized adoptions, which are supports that we provide to adoptive parents. Because of the caseloads just decreasing and they continue to decrease. And so even though we adjusted it last year to baseline for last year's, as Deputy Commissioner Radke mentioned, we're continuing to see that downward trend. So we are again decreasing it again this year. And then the last item is the private non-medical institutions or PNMI inflation factor. That is an adjustment to align the amounts that we're paying for placements at PNMI institutions with the inflation that we're seeing. That was implemented 2 years ago, and so now you'll see it every year on the next year budget.
Representative Steady?
Because I'm new. So over here, what's the 6,449,921?
The 6,449,921, so that's the total increase to
That's the increase.
our FSD appropriation proposed by the governor's budget. That includes all funding sources, including federal dollars, Medicaid adjustments, and general fund.
Is that the type of testimony we're hearing? Is that the monies that will be used?
This is budget, yep.
Okay, that's good to know.
Yeah.
Thanks.
So, right, so that's the section that you and Representative Donahue are digging deeper into that family services.
Yeah.
While we're in that area, and if you're getting this update, then I'll wait till that, but the CWIS, the Child Welfare Information System, not seeing any sort of big dollar amounts in there for continued implementation of the new system, and just wondering where we're at on that.
Or I can provide some high level information and Erica can jump in and fill in the blanks, but we are still awaiting federal approval to put it out to bid again through an RFP process. And of course, there's a lot of unknowns right now about whether we're going to get that approval or whether we'll still have a 50% match eventually. But that's because there is that 50% match, we need to get approval with the requirements that we put on it and how we put it out to bid. So it's in a holding pattern at the moment. We thought it was going to be a quick turnaround. They said it was going to be a quick turnaround, but it hasn't been. It's now been about a month, I think. So we've nudged a couple of times. We'll continue to push for an answer, but until it goes out to RFP, we won't have a real good sense for how much it's going to cost or how much money we should be putting aside. I think we're roughly in the neighborhood of $8 million that we do have put aside. And Erica, could you maybe fill in the blanks there?
There's not much else to fill. You really did hit it. It is about,
Every once in a while.
Every once in a while, right there, give you the hammer.
it's about 8-9 million, and we really did decide that instead of trying to request money until we had a much better idea of how much we would need, we decided we would hold off until we got the RFPs back and had some sense there of how much would be required. Because when we did a survey of CWIS states that had the CWIS already, the prices were ranging everywhere from, you know, 50 million up to over 100 million. And we just had no real way to determine how much we would need. And another factor in that is because we are starting basically from ground zero because we didn't have anything, whereas most of the other states at least had a SACWIS system and they were building on that. We really did not have a good idea or firm grasp of how much it would ultimately cost. Our estimates are ranging somewhere between 20 and 50 million. But until we get those RFPs and actually get then we'll get a better sense of how much it will cost. And as Commissioner Winters indicated, we've been nudging, but it seems like with a lot of the changes now with the new administration, it's unclear what will happen with that federal match.
And so I might have misunderstood what you said, Commissioner. Is this the second time you've asked for approval? Did you ask for approval previously? And so what happened in that process?
Yeah, I didn't mention that, but that is correct.
Okay.
In the spring, we put it out and our partners at BGS Contracting said there was an error in that. Kind of a technical error. So they recommended, risk management recommended we pull it back because the responses wouldn't have been responsive to what we actually wanted them to respond to because of a few criteria, I think, were flipped or ranked inappropriately. But that also gave us the chance to add in some additional flexibility is what we wanted to do so that we could get more bids from an agile IT perspective. So not like, here are all of the requirements and we want this on day one, and a big bang is what they call it, versus a sort of a waterfall of we can do this module by module, make incremental progress, see what works, see what doesn't, iterations of the system. That's the preferred IT approach now, and the preferred approach with the new Secretary of the Agency of Digital Services. So we've modified that somewhat over a couple of months. That's why we went back for a second approval.
So you had to go back for second
I had to
approval.
go back for second approval, and then they sent it back to us and said, oh, we found something new. We want you to change this boilerplate language that was around ownership of data, I think. And we said, okay, fine, we'll do that. It was just a technical correction. And that's why they said, oh, it'll just be a few days. We'll send it right back to you. And then now it's hung up again, unfortunately.
Right.
I would also add that the BAA is really the place that we would be looking to address any funding needs, because these costs are one-time in nature, upfront investments, whereas the budget is a baseline adjustment. So
We have lots of one-time money that goes through the budget.
yes, we couldn't see it on our ups downs because these are all baseline changes.
Baseline changes, yeah, thank you. Rep Donahue?
Yeah, I mean, that's consistent. We had the conversation for BAA about the status of it, which was when it was at the point of we should be hearing any day. But I think our sense back at that prior time in terms of asking for more money, that it would be a tough sell with appropriations to say, we don't really know what it's going to cost, but we want to keep adding,
Set
you know,
aside.
3 million a year to set aside. You know, we've done that for, I guess we've had 3 years in a row where money has been added to the set aside and is now with the federal funds in the realm of about 15 million. So.
Okay, more to follow, I guess,
Yeah.
is the answer to that. Yeah, go ahead, Representative Bishop.
I just want to get some clarity. There was reference to the difficulty in figuring out how much it would cost, but there was an estimate of 20 to 50 million. But a bit earlier, someone referenced 8 to 9 million. Was that?
So the 20 to 50 was just an informal survey of other states and what they've spent. The 8 to 9 is money that we have set aside, and probably mixing something because there is a 50% match in there. That's money that we've set aside toward this project, and that the legislature has set aside. There was an additional 3 million added in last year's budget.
So we've started to sock away, if you will.
Yes.
Yeah.
So when we get the fund, something in the BAA, it'll be our 50% minus where we put like, right.
7.8 million, I believe, is the current amount of state money. And then hopefully that would get an additional 50% match, which would bring it to, you know, a little over 15 million. That's.
I think the low of other states was 20 to 25 million, I think is what they've spent. That doesn't mean that we need to follow exact same suit. Maybe there are some other ways that we can do this. We know it won't be cheap.
Yeah, I I'd also add that in addition to what Commissioner Winters was talking about as far as having the agile approach that we added, that is also will be helpful for us given the way we may need to fund it, where we will have to go module by module. That way we can still continue to work and build our CWIS system, even if we don't end up purchasing it all at once. So we're definitely trying to find ways to make it cost effective and also make sure we're able to finally get started once we, choose the vendor, once we finally get the RFP back from the feds.
Okay, thank you.
Unless there's any more questions about family services, I will move on to child development division. Which is the blue section of the narrative. You're following along with my narrative answers. The personal services is all salaries and fringe, so we'll skip over that. Operating is all internal service funds, so we'll skip over that. And that brings us to the grants section. The first portion is the parent-child center budget realignment between DMH and DCF, so we can skip over that. We have one additional line for this in our budget for next year that was not in our budget for BAA because a portion of the costs for the Western Counseling and Support Services, or NCSS, had stayed with DMH for a portion of this year. So all of that funding is moving to DCF for next year. That's just why there's one extra line. And then the TANF revenue realignment continues to happen. That again, it was a BAA item. And that brings us to our childcare financial assistance program, caseload savings. Similar to the BAA, we do an exhaustive analysis of all of our populations that are eligible, the number of people that the census says are in each of those populations. We look at our utilization rates, the cost of utilization, and then we project that out. We did share our data with JFO and discuss it with them, and they seemed comfortable with our numbers. This is a very conservative reduction in our caseload. We really believe that when we built this budget, it was really hard to know what the world looked like and who would be utilizing it. Even accounting for an uptake throughout this year, we think that the budget was just built a bit higher than our total utilization will end up being in 26. And so we are realizing some caseload savings there.
So I just want to point out for members that in last year's budget, it's FY25 year that we're in right now, there's language that I forget, I think it's till FY28 or 9 or something like that, that will do a consensus forecast of what these expenses are. So you can see in the notation that that's something that was agreed upon with the Joint Fiscal Office. And so while we'll have pushback from some of the advocates about that, it really is an amount that is based upon consensus between the legislature's Joint Fiscal Office and the administration. So just wanted people to have that background. Yeah, go ahead.
And just
Rick,
to
your
add
thoughts.
to that, just to clarify, my understanding is that there is, because this is an entitlement, if the utilization does go up, no one will be denied services
There won't be
or
a waiting list,
access
right.
to the financial assistance program. That this reduction doesn't mean that less people will be served.
Correct. It is, if you are eligible, you will be served. We really don't think that there's any risk of needing to go to the human services caseload. This is a very conservative approach. But yes, that would be available if that situation did happen. And so then the last item on here is the CCFAP e-board revenue shift. We will have seen something similar on BAA. It is a different number here. based on what the economists forecasted for our childcare tax revenue, payroll tax revenue receipts. They're coming in much higher, they're projected to come in much higher than we had in our base budget built assumptions for it. And so this allows us to swap the general fund with the special fund, utilize the special fund for exactly what it was intended to be utilized for, and then achieve broader agency-wide needs of our general fund to meet agency caseload costs.
Megan, do you know if, and this might be a question for the e-board, but do you know if the expectation is that we're gonna, because in the BAA, I think it was 13 million, now it's 19 million. So are we gonna continue to see this coming in above what the expectation is, do you know? Or what we had anticipated?
I would refer you to probably to the e-board and the economists on that. I would say that payroll taxes are based on payrolls, and payrolls tend to go up over time with inflationary pressures. So we would anticipate an increasing revenue over time. And I think if you look at the JFO, I don't have the number, or the e-board tax consensus report, they do provide multiple years into the future projections there.
It will ebb and flow with the economy, so, if in the future, our economy goes in cycles, so there'll be, a recession at some point in time, and payroll taxes will likely level off and dip. So that's the importance of this being sort of, I guess, what I would call fluid. So, and as Megan said, it's exactly what the childcare contribution is intended to be used for, is the childcare financial assistance program. So, yeah, go ahead.
Should the economy remain steady or grow in strength, that amount will grow, the payroll tax. Are there, if you could help me, are there any built-in increases in Act 76 for reimbursement rates that this potential increase in payroll revenue would help cover?
That's a good question. I don't remember what we built in, and maybe Deputy Commissioner McLaughlin, who works with us day in and day out, could answer that question. I know, we bumped it up 35%. And then we also reduced the differential between center-based and family home care based. We reduced the difference by 50%. And I'm trying to remember if we add an inflationary factor or not, but I don't recall.
Yep, happy to take that one. So Deputy Commissioner Janet McLaughlin of Child Development Division for DCF. And there is not an inflationary factor built into the childcare financial assistance rate setting. Last in Act 76, you did ask us to do a report on what that, on different methods for doing that. And that was submitted last year, but we didn't have discussion on that. CDD has continued to do its own, do some additional analysis on what some of the options are for that, and how to think about it related to sort of a more of a cost of care methodology, and be happy to tell you more about that in another conversation, but it's not officially part of the process.
We have on our OMA schedule Act 76 update. So Deputy Commissioner, we'll be inviting you to review that report, and then any other recommendations that you have about continued implementation of Act 76 in more detail. So thank you for that. The other thing to remember is in the BAA, we specifically also enabled access to the Human Services Caseload Reserve, because this is Human Services and it is caseload. So that's not something that previously existed. So in an economic downturn, that's the purpose of having these reserves for entitlement services. And so we would then have access to that reserve. Thanks, Megan.
Okay, so that's CDD. The next one on here in green is the Office of Child Support. I don't believe there's actually anything on here that we need to talk about unless anyone has any OCS questions. And that brings us to aid for the aged, blind, and disabled. Similar, so it's the same items that we saw on BAA, the increase in the cost per case, that we pay the feds to administer the payments on our behalf, and then this benefit savings due to caseload decreasing over time, and then the cost associated with the essential persons program going up. It all sort of cancels each other out with a very small up in the end. The numbers are slightly different because we're projecting out another year, but it is the same items. Anyone have any ABD questions? Okay. General assistance. We have on here 3 items. The first 2 are the same as BAA. The third one is the security reduction. We were given as part of the bill last year, $839,184 for security. The language in the bill, though, said that we could only spend $500,000 on security. So this is just the difference in what's appropriated for that and what we are allowed to spend on it.
Yeah, go ahead.
So for the GA, the grants for it includes things like burials, medical care. Then there's also some room to help for personal needs. I'm just wondering how we're seeing a reduction in caseloads when we know there's greater need. And wondering what you all are doing about education about this program. I know in my work, there has been tons of turnover. I went to the website, it's very sparse. I've talked to case managers who had no idea there was other funding to the GA. And so I'm wondering if the decrease in caseload you're seeing is not based on need, but really just from a lack of awareness of this really important resource we have. And so can you tell me what outreach you do about this program or education or what materials you have that you might hand out regularly?
I'll defer to Deputy Commissioner Gray on that one, on what our efforts might be there.
Thank you. For the record, Miranda Gray, Deputy Commissioner of the Economic Services Division. And thank you. I think you're pointing out somewhere our focus has been predominantly on the GA motel program. And so maybe this is an area over the last few years. And I think that some of the members, because a part of this is paying people's rent, their room and board, which was a very small benefit. And now people can access the hotel program. But I think that's something that we could commit to. How do we provide more education? I think it is as my staff engage with people, we let them know what services there are the same way we would if someone came in, applying for 3 squares, perhaps they're over income, then we refer them to local food shelves or just let them know, what are some other resources. But this is an area that we could bolster.
Thank you. Go ahead.
You could share a bit more about the security line item, and I understand why a reduction is put in there for past funding was contrary to the legislative language, but how is this security funding utilized? Is there a need for greater funding above what had previously been appropriated by the legislature? Anything else you can share, and that would be appreciated.
Deputy Commissioner Gray.
Currently, I think this is a little bit of a holdover from the pandemic. There were certain establishments that we needed to help put some more security measures in. There was one establishment that we were doing this for last year, but that has since had its license pulled by the Department of Health. And so right now we aren't actually supporting this, and this is going to be more of a conversation with the establishment and the local municipalities about if we are seeing a lot of concerning behavior happening at motels, whose responsibility is it to ensure that rules are being abided by there? So right now, I think that this is sufficient, and not to say that I think it is the municipality's responsibility to take up this on, but rather the motel, as if any of us were going to a hotel or motel, we want to make sure that we are feeling safe there. So that is where the conversations are going now.
And what role do you see the state and your department having as a player in ensuring security?
Yeah, so I can speak to, there is an area that I'm working closely with who has brought to my attention that there are two establishments that they feel like there is a lack of safety. And so I have given warning letters, and I'm about to issue letters letting them know that they must engage in providing some form of security, and that can vary depending on what municipality might find helpful. Sometimes security firms don't feel like they have enough authority, and they are really just becoming a mechanism to calling the municipal services in more, so they aren't really mitigating anything. But essentially, is what I'm telling them is if they don't follow through, is that we aren't going to be able to use their establishment because they aren't providing a safe environment for people to be able to stay in, and that is something that we take very seriously, because ultimately I'm responsible for the safety of those that are staying in the hotels under the GA program.
I guess I would just, one last follow-up. I would have some concern if it's put back on the hotel, motel owners, whether they would fully engage in that process of ensuring there was appropriate security, and the timeline then of it being reevaluated by the state and sort of getting out further in time, and the impact that it may be having on communities, municipality services is of concern. So we'll just leave it at that and highlight that issue.
I would just add, Representative, that demonstrates one of the most significant challenges we have in delivering human services and shelter through private business, where our ability to enforce some of the rules that we'd like to see, or some of the safety and health measures we'd like to see in those hotels, it is limited to, we can make a complaint to the Department of Health. The Department of Health can inspect. We can say we're going to withhold funds. We can stop using that hotel. And it's a real challenge when you have a large number of clients in those hotels who may very well become the victims of people who would move in and take advantage of them. So we've had, less success with large hotels and large populations. And so, that is part of our strategy moving forward, is to not rely on hotels as much and try to rely on shelters more, which is why you see us, constantly saying, don't expand our GA program with hotels, and do expand our more traditional shelter settings.
Just a second, Representative. So, and this may be something that the budget team in this area has already asked you for, or you're working on, but it would be, because this only shows ups and downs, it doesn't show like the base budget. It'd be helpful if we could see base budget and one-time sort of trends, like from FY23 up through FY26. So we have some sense of progression and what the total resources are that are being allocated to temporary emergency shelter in this area. Representative Steady and then Representative Cole.
Can a hotel owner ask a person to leave if they feel concern of safety for others? Can they ask them to leave immediately if they're worried about safety and somebody getting hurt?
Yes, they are a private business. And we do, and Deputy Commissioner Gray can speak to this. We do try to work with that client to find them a placement in another hotel. And there are some clients we've worked with who've been asked to leave multiple hotels. Miranda, is there anything you'd like to add to that?
No, Commissioner, I think you got it.
Go ahead, Representative Cole.
I wonder if the department is looking to any research. I mean, I think I'm hearing this line, and it's reflected in the budget numbers, that safety we would all be better off, like if we were to invest more in the shelters and less in the hotels in terms of safety. And I'm just curious, is that grounded in any data? I don't know if we should make that assertion unless it is proven.
Yeah, thank you, Representative. I would say that when we issue grants, we have shelter standards that we have our grantees follow. That the people who work in those shelters are professionals who are equipped to work with certain populations that hotel owners would not be. So I think generally speaking, you will find people who are in shelters have a much better experience than those who are in the hotel and motel program, including all the safety issues.
And just to push back a little bit or follow up on that point, I think that difference speaks to the direct interaction of that individual sort of wraparound services caseworker versus the setting of a hotel versus the shelter itself. So I think that is the key piece that actually changes outcomes and safety. So when we talk about the actual setting, I think when it comes to budget considerations and where we're putting those funds, I think, yes, we must consider the caseworker, but we also, I don't think we should conflate the two. And maybe we should consider other health benefits for certain people with especially certain disabilities or other needs, which the very specific population we're talking about in the GA have very specific needs that might actually be far worse off when it comes to health and safety and otherwise when they're in a congregate shelter setting. So I just worry about conflating the two, except for the piece about the caseworker, which is absolutely true. I think, in that I'm sure whatever data is out there shows that if a person has wraparound supports, that the outcomes are going to be better. So
yeah, I don't disagree with anything you've said there. I was using generalizations, but can also bring you, nightmare story after nightmare story about things that happen in hotels.
yeah, totally. I hear that, but I think also it's just, that's because it's in the eye of the public versus the nightmare stories that have a trickle around effects just when people are unsheltered or, whether they are utilizing the congregate shelters or not, because a lot of these folks, rather than using the congregate shelter, I mean, that's also a generalization, but rather than using the congregate shelter, are just going to be outside instead, because we saw the uptake rates when we did offer that congregate shelter. And I know there were many factors involved in the utilization of those congregate shelters, but I do think that it's just that we're not it's not as in the public eye sometimes. And we're facing the consequences, but not in the same way that we might be when it's in a more obvious setting. I don't know. Hopefully some of that makes sense, but I just worry about conflating different safety.
But we do have expectations. I mean, I hear what you're saying, Rep. Cole, but we also have expectations that the environment, the hotel environment meets your basic public health and safety requirements and fire safety requirements. And I think that we shouldn't expect people who are homeless to be any less protected by public expectations around safe environments than we would for anybody else of the traveling public or people who stay in those hotels. I understand your point that we should avoid making broad generalizations about particular settings. We should also avoid making them about congregate shelters.
Yeah,
and I have also seen that work in some situations, depending upon the matches made and the importance of having trained staff, the importance of people's ability to make choices about where they are and where they are not is just as important, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah. I want to make sure that we have, so we're kind of, digressing into a conversation about H91, if you will. Can we hold off? Is that right? All right, thank you. I want to make sure we get an opportunity to get all the way through. We're getting close, so.
Yeah, I think the rest will go really quickly. Three Squares Vermont is our food supports. It's 100% federally funded. And so you'll see there that we're just making two adjustments. The first one was not on BAA because we addressed that first via a different funding mechanism this year to get the spending authority, but we're asking for baseline of 5.4 million to support our summer EBT spending authority, which is the cost to support meals for children over the summer that the federal government is now awarding us. So unless anyone has EBT questions. Moving on to the reach up. We do have a caseload adjustment here, again, based on the caseload trends that we've seen over time and the cost per case, utilizing the caseload projections from our consultant, Leslie Black Dumont, that's what LBP stands for. And that her projection is that we will have savings of 697,000 once you apply the cost per case.
We have a question. Go ahead, Remy.
I'm just wondering if you can, are able to share those projections with us, or at least with Edmay and I, and Representative Bloomley from appropriations.
I'm happy to share that number.
And then just for this, and also, yeah, just for Reach Up, anything really related to caseloads and like under 3 squares, are we accurately forecasting kind of the caseloads for the current situation in our country? Again, poverty has not gotten better, so why are our Reach Up caseloads numbers going down? And I just want to make sure we are prepared to meet the need that I foresee with this as time plays out with our federal administration. I don't think Vermonters are going to be ending up with more resources.
I would just add to that, that the 3 squares is federally funded. So
Yeah.
I'm not projecting so much as looking at where we landed last year and making sure we have the spending authority.
Okay.
And if for some reason we did not have enough spending authority, which is possible, there's always the, you can request additional federal spending authority at any point.
Representative Bloomley just wanted me to make sure that we made sure that that could be addressed if there's like dire increase.
An uptick in need.
Yeah. And then, yeah, for Reach Up, I still have that same question on why we're seeing that.
Can I just ask, when you were asking about the projections, I recall last year that there were 2 different projections by the same organization. And DCF used the lower of the 2, and we recommended using the higher of the 2. And which one actually ended up borne out being accurate?
It is in fact the low one again this year.
And I guess, given that we saw BAA changes, in that seemed to be the more accurate one
Yes.
for last year, for this current year we're in, I should say. So I'm going to ask the same question that we asked during BAA. You know, when we already, this isn't even at the basic needs budget. So it's at an amount less than the basic needs budget, and then we reduce it by 50%. Was there any consideration, and you can blame your boss for this, because I asked this of the secretary and she said, ask the commissioner when he's here. So I'm doing that. Was there any discussion, any internal discussion about the looking at utilization, given the fact that, you know, DCF is giving back a bunch of general fund through the Child Care Financial Assistance Program, and looking at a reduction in caseload. And that reduction, we don't know what we don't know the impact of any federal changes on anything, it's essentially right now. When the state's economy is strong, this is very typical of what we see. So it's not unexpected. But I guess what I'm trying to get at is, did you give any consideration to reducing the rateable reduction? In other words, giving more money in the pockets of Reach Up families?
I know it's on the mind of the legislature every year. We do a report on it every year. I would say that we always give it consideration, but I would say, you know, honestly, it was fleeting. We have a 3% that we were given to meet. And so any increases were treated as new initiatives, and we were to hold the line on new initiatives as much as we possibly could. So I'd say we do discuss it, but it wasn't something that made the cut as we tried to put together a budget that held the 5%.
So I guess, I'll say one, we're also basing it on outdated information, the base year is several years old now. And where's Senator Kitchell when I need her? Who is, has been a longstanding advocate of Reach Up. And I guess I'm just wondering if there were any, when we're looking at needs and looking at mostly single moms with young children in this category, is there, are there other things in the DCF budget, in terms of priority setting that maybe are a lesser priority? I'm not saying, we think they're sitting here around the table and in the building and everybody thinks that everything is of equal priority or high. I guess I would say that might not be the case when it comes to, very poor individuals who are trying their best to lift themselves up out of poverty. And this seems to be a really important thing to address, because we're just falling further and further and further behind every year. And then it takes a much bigger chunk of money to get us even, up a couple of years on the base level. So it's my soapbox. Representative Steady.
I'm all set.
Okay.
So our next appropriation is our home heating fuel assistance, or buy heat appropriation. We have no changes there, so moving right past it. Which brings us to the Office of Economic Opportunity. Scrolling through personal services and operating, because there's no major changes there. We do have the funding for operating for new positions to support our permanent supportive housing program that are related with all the operating costs other than IT. And then we get to the last item on here, which is our housing opportunity program baseline increase. So we're adding 3.35 million of general fund to continue supporting housing opportunity programs and shelter expansion initiatives. OREO.
So like what we requested for GA emergency housing, like the same thing from FY23 forward to FY26, the base level and one time for top. That would be great.
And are you looking for expenses or budget?
I'm looking for what's in the budget. Yeah. Yeah, go ahead.
I know this relates also to H91. As I look at the note for that housing opportunity program and the intention or hope to increase sheltering capacity by approximately 85 additional households. While there's a discussion of ratcheting down, if you will, the motel program, it doesn't seem like the numbers where you're probably hoping to ratchet that down match with only adding 85 shelter capacity by 85. So it seems that while there's much discussion about whether the motel program is operating the way we would like or is the best option, lots of discussion about that point. It's what we have currently, and I'm a little concerned about funding ratcheting down before the state's desired congregate sheltering is really viable as an option.
Yeah, I appreciate the comment. Director Sojourner is going to be here in a little while. She wasn't able to come this morning, but for this, but she'll be here shortly to discuss the kind of the landscape of the shelter system, give you an idea of what we have currently, what has come online recently, what we have in the pipeline. It doesn't match a one-for-one on how we'd like to see or reduce GA and move to traditional shelter. And again, we should be having that conversation of, do we really want to build a bunch of shelter beds? Do we want to continue to rely on the hotel motel program as opposed to building more affordable housing, which can often be done in the same amount of time and often in comparable funding than a shelter. You'll hear from her.
I couldn't even make eye contact when you said that.
You will hear from her all of the projects. I'm being very serious here, and that you gave us $10 million last year. We had a bunch of projects say we can do this by December 1st. We can do this by January 1st, and very few of them actually hit it. The snags they run into, Upper Valley,
That was my point. It's like, yeah.
it takes a long time, and it can be very expensive, and community support and workforce and all of those things. And not trying to make excuses, I'm telling you the reality of what it takes to stand up shelter beds is very, very difficult.
Yeah, which is, I think, it goes to Representative Bishop's comment. It was like, so we don't have something that's an alternative.
Don't want to
So-
reduce the.
Right, and
Jump in and say that the money, it does appear that it's lower than this year, but we are proposing to fund the same emergency.
that's what I was just gonna ask you. Is this based upon
Yeah.
what was in the budget last year in terms of the construct of the program? Yes. Okay.
Mine's just building on that. It's like, I think everyone agrees we need to build housing. Absolutely, let's do it. In the meantime, these are humans. Ones we've decided are the most essentially vulnerable in our state to qualify for them for this program. So where is the plan? What are we going to do with these people in the meantime? And right now, the only option, the only thing we have is the program, the hotels. So when you say these things, what is your plan for these people, our human beings, our neighbors, constituents, Vermonters? What is the plan?
That's an H91 conversation we'll be
Yes.
prepared to speak to next week.
Thank you, Megan.
Moving right along, we get to weatherization. The only changes in weatherization are salaries, fringe, ISF, so we can skip through that. Then we get to secure resident treatment, which I did meet with Rep. Steady and Rep. Donahue yesterday. The only changes here are very small adjustments to our internal services funds. We do allocate the internal service funds across our various appropriations based on various allocation factors such as utilization of these various things. So that was just small changes. And then we get to disability determination services. Again, no major changes here, just the salaries, fringe, and internal service funds. And that is the base budget. We do have the two one-time appropriations, but you won't see them on the ups downs.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Okay, that was a lot. Thank you for coming back. Thank you for answering our questions to your best of your ability. And we look forward to the continued discussion, both in the budget, but also in the context of H91 and how we sort of try to set a path forward. That's somewhat predictable and understanding the resources that we have to spend at the same time. So any final questions? Thank you.
Thank you.
And thanks
Thank you all.
to everybody who was online and answered our questions there too. We appreciate it a lot. Okay, a quick 5-minute break, folks.